Hey there, fellow maker. Bill here. Welcome to my shop. Today I'm doing some masking on this Mass Effect space gun here. I'm going to be doing a weathering demo on this. I figured while I'm doing my masking, might as well show you how I do my masking. First things first. The gun you can see is mostly white. This is the M5 Phalanx, mostly white, but some of the spots on it are metallic or black. I've spray painted the base coat of white. So I covered the entire thing with white spray paint. If you want a really nice finish on your prop, if you want it to look like it came off of a machine, well, then you gotta spray it. So either use an airbrush if you've got one, or just some spray paint. Now I've started with the white paint on here for my base coat. It's the lightest color. It's also the most prevalent color on this gun. The next layer will be the black. So what I'm masking off here is the areas that I want to stay white. The only thing I want exposed are areas like over here on the handle, which will end up black in the final piece. So as a general rule, going from the lighter to darker colors as you're masking off different sections of your prop is a good rule to follow. Okay, let's talk tape. Got a whole bunch of different masking tapes here. This is the stuff you'll probably find most commonly at your hardware store. This is painter's tape, and it's generally designed for painting or masking off stuff like wall paint or house paint. It's okay, but if you can help it, you want to get something a little bit better. This stuff is all right too. If you can find something that considers itself a delicate surface masking tape, I'd go with that. A good step up from that is this frog tape, and the yellow variety here is their delicate surfaces variety. I usually keep some of that on hand, especially this wider 2-inch wide stuff for covering large areas. If you're really looking to up your masking game, these tapes here, these Tamiya masking tapes and other tapes that are designed for model making are very hard to beat. You see, they have this delicate balance between being sticky enough to stay down, but not so sticky that they will pull the finish up. Of course, it comes in several widths. I usually keep this thinner one and this wider one on hand. And while it is a bit pricier, it's still not terrible. I get this stuff at the local hobby store, and it really does make a massive difference when you're doing your masking, having really good tape. Oh, also this stuff here is also from Tamiya. It's vinyl, so it's flexible if you need to go around curves. I'll show you that in a minute. So probably one of the most important things you can do before masking is wait for your paint to dry. Whatever your base coat was, you wanna make sure it's dry enough so that when you lay tape down on it, it's not gonna pull the paint up when you peel off that layer of masking. This particular paint was spray painted on, and I let it dry overnight. If you have a test piece of something that you can spray some paint on when you're painting your prop that you can check, put a piece of tape on and peel it off, that is really great. It's a lot better than trying to test it on a part of your prop that you might potentially ruin. So most of your masking can be done by hand. You just take your bit of tape, line it up with the edge of whatever piece you want to mask off and lay it down and gently touch it down. Now, to get it down into those crevices, having a tool like these plastic tweezers, or maybe gently pressing it down with one of these little spatulas, these metal carving chisels. That way you can really help force the edge of that tape down where it needs to go. I also like having tweezers on hand to carefully place masking tape, like so. Or you could take an X-Acto blade and use that to just barely hold on to your piece of tape. Carefully position it, press it down with your finger, and then use a tool to press your tape down into the crevice. That's all well and good for really straight edges, but if you have a curve to follow, you've got to do something a little bit different. Now, like I said before, you can use this vinyl tape from Tamiya or any other company. Take a bit of your tape here, and it will stretch to follow around a curve. Like that. When it gets to the edge, you can trim it off. I have found this stuff is not quite as tacky as the normal tape. And if you really push it to its limits, it'll start to peel up a little bit. Another option is to take a bigger piece of tape, lay it down over the entire area, press it down. You can use your thumbnail, you could use a tool. Press it down into that crevice. And then with your X-Acto knife, cut a line down the edge. And it's okay if the X-Acto is scoring the surface a little bit. That's a deep groove right there. That's going to be filled in with some weathering paints later. You'll never notice that you've scored the surface a little bit. So you cut the piece, peel it out, lay it down flat. You can even go back in and make sure that everything is laid down nicely. And there you go. You just repeat that all around your curve with some overlapping tape, like so. And you're good to go. So usually I will go around all of the edges and make sure those are nice and tidy before I worry about covering the bigger spots. So this area right here in the middle needs to be covered. Usually I'll go in with a larger piece of tape and cover that up. To get the edge close, I can just tear that, take that piece that I've torn out, cover that little spot there. I can even use a knife if I want to. Carefully cut out. There we go. Now let's say you've got a large area to cover. You don't want to necessarily use a ton of this tape. You've got some options. I really like this tool here for covering large areas. If you have a costume or a large prop, this thing is awesome. It's got a roll of paper on it. It has a roll of tape on it, and this is the delicate surfaces tape. And basically, you pull out however much you need. It combines the tape and the paper. You rip it off, and you have a big old piece of masking area, and you just have to touch it down where the tape is, and then this piece of paper can be used to cover the rest of your prop. I'll even tear off a piece like this or several pieces and mask off a whole prop, spray my next layer of paint, carefully peel it away, and then I will use it on a different part of the prop. You can reuse this a couple times. It's a bit of a luxury, obviously. You could do this yourself without the tool, but I think it's pretty handy. You can also use shrink wrap to cover a ton of your prop. This is also really great for those times when, let's be honest, sometimes you don't let the paint dry as much as you need to. This doesn't have any adhesive on it, so you can use it to cover part of your prop, and it's not gonna, hopefully, pull the paint off when you pick it up. So basically, if I needed to mask off the front of my gun here, I could do that. Wrap it a couple times, tear it off, and then the area where this needs to join right there, I could use a piece of tape, overlap my prop and the shrink wrap there, and this part here will be completely protected from any layers of paint that I spray on. One of the other great reasons why you could use this is if you have a lot of area and you want to cover it quickly. Something else to think about if you're doing masking or any type of stencils is whether or not the paint you're spraying on is going to bleed under the edges of your tape. Now, this Tamiya tape is really good about that not happening, but if it's a problem or a concern, what you can do is spray on a layer of clear spray paint before you spray on the next color. Hopefully then, that clear spray paint will seep under any of the gaps in your tape, clog it up with a clear layer, and then your colored layer won't be bleeding under. It'll stop in that clear layer, and then when you peel the masking away, you won't even notice it. Although I'll be honest, with this Tamiya tape, I don't do that, and it works just fine. So one more thing here, this curve here, I'm gonna trim that with my X-Acto knife, and I have a brand new blade in here. Usually whenever I'm masking off a prop, I'll treat myself. Get a nice new blade in there because you really want to make sure you get it cut nice and clean on the first try. So you minimize how much effort, how hard you have to push, and if you go over that a couple times, you might accidentally score the surface where you don't want to score it. So one nice clean cut with a fresh blade and you're good to go. Before I run off and lay down the next layer of paint, I just want to double check that I have everything covered and that I have the right areas covered. It can be really easy to forget positive and negative space. So, good example. It looked like I was ready to go. However, I missed this spot right in there. That should be covered. I got all the edges, but I didn't cover this big area there. So I can grab a bit of tape there and get that covered up. It doesn't need to be pretty because I already got those edges. It just needs to be covered. Cool. I've got everything covered as far as I can tell. Now that I've got everything covered, I just want to make sure I go over all of the edges and make sure that they are nice and snug and tight down to the surface. I don't want any overspray sneaking into areas I don't want to get any of the next layer of paint on. I'm doing a black paint. Should cover nice and easily. It's just a spray paint can. In this case, I'm going to put on 2 light layers. The black should cover the white really easily. Now in this case, I'm going to do the black paint, and then some of those areas are going to get sprayed with a metallic paint. So I'm going to spray on that black paint and then I'm going to let it dry pretty much overnight so that I can be sure that the next layer of masking won't get pulled up when I peel it off. And it's been a couple of days, had some other work to do, so I let this sit and dry completely. I have my reference image here. This is what I'm going for eventually. Many of these spots are going to remain black, but some of the spots, like let's say the trigger, this spot up here, or some of the spots up on the front, those are going to get painted a silver color, and I want to spray those on as well. So these areas, like the handle back here that I want to remain black, will get masked off. Just like before, I've got all my masking tape here, I've got all my tools, might as well get to work. Sometimes as I'm masking, I will try and pre-cut a piece. I'll just lay it down on the cutting mat here, make sure this is fairly clean. I want to get a piece to fit around the trigger there. So I'm going to just kind of eyeball it and cut it close enough. Just a little notch in the tape right there. And hopefully that will seat right around the trigger fairly well. That looks okay. That'll do pretty well, I think. Sometimes you can be a little more accurate with that. That should be fine. I'm going to weather in there too, so if the seam isn't perfect, I'm not going to cry about it. Okay, we're about, I don't know, 45 minutes later. Got everything set up here. Looking at my reference one more time just to make sure that everything is masked that should be masked. The little part that goes over the barrel there is hanging up in the other room. I will paint that before I glue it on. So I think I'm ready to go. Next layer will be a silver paint. I think I'm just going to use some rattle can tamiyas on this. And 1 or maybe 2 layers to just cover all the exposed areas. And again, going to take my time and let those dry. For those keeping track at home, this is the 3rd layer of masking and paint. The 3rd day and probably my 10th cup of coffee. The next thing I want to mask off are some of these slightly darker parts. There's just a couple of them. One on this little thing here and another one right on the front of the barrel. Plus, I think this part of the barrel here and maybe this part of the smaller barrel there. So, without further ado, I'm going to get to masking. Just a little bit more, 1 more layer of paint, and then we can finally peel this off. Now, some of you might be wondering, Bill, you haven't shown your face in this video. What's up with that? You copying that AVE guy or this old Tony? The truth is, I haven't showered. What? What? In 3 days you haven't showered? No more questions! Now this thing runs all the way around behind it there, so I have to make sure that I continue it all the way around. These little details make all the difference. Just a few minutes later and I've masked off all the parts I'm going to paint here. Now you might be asking, Bill, what about these parts? You're not going to paint those parts. Well, instead of wasting a bunch of tape and time masking off these parts, I'm just going to wrap it in shrink wrap. Ta-da! So I'm only painting the tip of the gun up here. The rest of this is totally protected. I saved myself a bunch of time. And for the painting, I got myself some Tamiya gunmetal paint. This is a little bit darker. This is the silver leaf, so I'll just use that in my airbrush and finish up the painting. One good layer of this darker gunmetal paint is all it should take. There we go. That's all it took. So when do you peel off all the masking tape? How long do you have to let it dry before you can rip all this tape off? Of course, it's going to depend on your application, your paint, and all that. But generally, I like to go with as soon as the paint is no longer coming off on your finger, if you touch it, you can peel it off. You can even peel it off while it's still wet if you want. It's just a hazard if it's still wet because you might touch it and ruin it. So in this case, it's dry enough to touch. I've given this about 10 minutes and I'm going to very carefully peel it off. And this is the best part, by the way. When you're peeling the tape off, if you can pull it along the surface as you go, generally that's going to help not rip up the paint below. So instead of pulling straight up like this, I'm going to pull along the paint like that. Also, don't be afraid to use your tools like tweezers to get in there and peel it up. So I don't want to pull it straight up like this. I want to pull it along the surface like that if I can. And there we go, a nicely painted and masked part. This is it, 3 days in the making. Time to rip all of this tape off carefully. So I am essentially working backwards from how I put all of this on. Again, using tools if I have to carefully peel up and pull away all the tape. That looks pretty good. Made it down to the black parts here, and as I'm peeling more away, the white paint is being revealed, the last layer. Of course, I'm just taking my time, no need to rush. All this paint has had plenty of time to dry, so none of it's coming off while I peel it off. Last bit of tape comes right off. There we go. This thing is fully painted with our base colors. Obviously, we still have like some decals to do and then some weathering. Probably gonna want to clear coat this with like a clear spray paint to protect all this paint job, but the masking and painting is all done. And hopefully you had fun following along and learned a couple of things. Of course, if you're new, you want to go ahead and hit that subscribe button and follow along with the rest of our prop and costume making projects. And besides, you're going to want to tune in next time when we figure out what to do with all this used masking tape.